Hello, this is Michael Wunsch. I'm the plant pathologist at the Carrington Research Center Extension Center with NDSU. And I'd like to talk to you today about planting chickpeas early. What should you be thinking about in terms of agronomic implications as well as disease management implications of planting chickpeas at the same time as wheat or very, very shortly after planting wheat? And to facilitate this discussion, I created a few slides, and I'd like to walk you through those slides. First off, there are some very strong agronomic advantages to planting chickpeas early. The varieties that we commonly plant in this area, varieties such as CDC Frontier, CDC Orion, or CDC Leader, are late maturing. When you plant your chickpeas in late April, at the same time as planting wheat, these chickpeas will typically mature or begin maturing in the second half of August, even if you get a lot of rainfall in the second half of July and early August. And you know, while in many of our chickpea producing areas we don't often get a lot of rainfall in those periods, sometimes we do. And when that happens, we can get late maturation. And so again, if you plant your chickpeas early, even with those rains, my experience has been that we get senescence in that second half of August, and that's very, very beneficial to facilitate a timely harvest. If you wait to plant your chickpeas until the second half of May, however, and you get those late rains, then those chickpeas can be grass green until the first killing frost. The major reason why a lot of people have not planted chickpeas early is because they've been concerned about seed decay and damping off. And these are real concerns in chickpeas. Chickpeas are very susceptible to Pythium and to Rhizoctonia, both of which cause seed decay and then lesions on the emerging epicotyls and the emerging taproots, which can cause those emerging seedlings to die off. Okay, now one of the things to remember though is that seed treatments are highly effective against these. Okay, so if you're planting early and the soils are wet, then one thing you want to remember is that you want to plant with a fungicide seed treatment with efficacy against both of these targets. The other major reason why people have had concerns about planting early is Ascochyta Blight. One of the ways that you can get Ascochyta Blight is from spores produced on overwintered chickpea residues. When chickpeas are diseased and those residues overwinter, on the overwintered residues in the spring, a special type of spore-producing structure is produced on the residues that releases spores that are carried aloft by air currents and can move many miles. Okay, those spores are released primarily in the early spring. In the Pacific Northwest, this occurs primarily in April. We have later springs than in the Pacific Northwest, and so here is probably most likely in May. Okay, but the spore release can be significant. In this research from the Pacific Northwest conducted in the mid-1980s, the researchers found in some cases over 1,000 spores per day released from every square millimeter of diseased chickpea tissue. And you can imagine if you had a section of chickpeas that were diseased and that's now covered in chickpea residues, how many spores can be produced? It's an enormous number of spores. These spores again are carried aloft by air currents and can move many miles. And when it rains, the spores come down with the rain. This is why you can get Ascochyta Blight in a field planted to disease-free chickpeas and in a field that had never had chickpeas ever before and is not adjacent to any field that ever had chickpeas before. Okay, the spores can move many miles. And so in the Pacific Northwest, growers have traditionally delayed their planting in the hope of avoiding some of these infection events driven by these airborne spores. Now, however, one of the things is, though, remember, you have to weigh this against the late maturation of the varieties we plant out here. Okay, and what we have found here in Carrington is that we can very successfully manage both the foliar and the soil-borne diseases of the chickpeas. And we are much better served by proceeding with an early planting date so that we get that early maturation and we have a timely harvest of the chickpeas. Okay, agronomically, it's just far superior to have this chickpea senescing in mid to late August, even if we get those late rains. Okay, and because of that, we plant our chickpeas in late April, and we've done so many years with great success. The key is that you must use a fungicide seed treatment if you're planting into cool, wet soils, or if you anticipate the soils getting wet and cold after you plant. All right, you need to protect against Pythium rhizoctonia, and almost all of the seed treatment fungicide premixes on the market have efficacy against both of these. You need to make sure you have an active ingredient with efficacy against Pythium. So this means metalaxyl or mefenoxam. If you have metalaxyl resistance, which is not common in our geography, but if you have it, you want to supplement with ethaboxam, the active ingredient in tegosol. There are many fungicides with activity against rhizoctonia. All right, and anything from Apromax to Vibrance Max, to Obvious, to the various generics out there. Okay, and the other thing I would add is that the effectiveness of delaying planting for avoiding Ascochyta Blight is really unclear here in the Northern Plains. You know, remember, our springs come later than the Pacific Northwest. We often get later rains in the summer than the growers do in the Pacific Northwest. And in my experience, we seem to get significant Ascochyta Blight no matter when we plant our chickpeas if we get those late rains. And so I don't know to what extent we can manage our Ascochyta Blight with planting date. And because of that, I personally choose to plant our chickpeas early, manage the soil-borne diseases with a fungicide seed treatment, and then irrespective of when we plant our chickpeas, though, I plan on managing the Ascochyta Blight proactively. A little note about the fungicide seed treatments. This is a great example of this. These were chickpea plots that we planted in 2017 on April 22nd. Soil temperature of seeding was about 51 or 52 degrees Fahrenheit. But immediately after planting, we got hit by really cold, wet weather. We got about a ½ inch of precipitation and a mixture of rain and snow. Soil temperatures dropped to 36 to 37 degrees Fahrenheit for about 36 hours straight. Soil temperatures are wet. Soils are wet and soggy for an extended period. And it was really the worst case scenario for cold, wet soils. And what do you see here? Where we planted these strips with untreated seed, and you can see it obviously in this picture, these strips of these scraggly chickpeas with poor vigor. Okay, and then you see these chickpeas with good vigor and a great canopy. Well, those just had Apromax on it, the old Apromax. Okay, and that old Apromax in that case was all we needed. All right, and where we had that Apromax, we had a good stand, we had a good canopy, we had good vigor, and we had good yield. And that just illustrates, if you have problems with cold, wet soils, i.e. typically what we see early in the spring, even though this year might not have so much of that wetness, given how dry it's been. But in those years with cold, wet soils, use that fungicide seed treatment. It'll pay on chickpeas. Other thing I would mention is we have developed updated recommendations for chickpea Ascochyta management, and I will put together another short presentation detailing that. All right, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or give me a call. My name is Michael Wunsch. I'm the pathologist at Carrington Research Center. Just Google NDSU Carrington. You'll find my contact information there. Thank you. Have a nice day.